The Street Corner Soapbox. The Street Corner Soapbox with Falso and Willin. Podcast takeover. We're making a killing. Music to nightlife. Debauchery and street news. Serving it hot. We are some street news, movies, and mayhem. The craziest guests, words from chaos. Get it off our chest, Rhode Island, worldwide. Dark corners in all places. Speak how we live, radio show, smoking aces. Ladies and gents, for the people we're talking. Take the show on the road, right where you're walking. Yeah.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Street Corner Soapbox Podcast coming to you live. That's right, boys and girls. Street Corner Soapbox. Now, we all know during this crazy time with the pandemic, businesses are struggling. So we're here to support local businesses, and we need your help to do so also.
That's right. So subscribe to our Patreon, become a member to help support the show, and receive exclusive episodes and bonus content, as well as discounts on merch. That's patreon.com/streetcorner_soapbox2020.
Follow us on our website, streetcornersoapbox.com. That's right, boys and girls. We are back. Street Corner Soapbox. I'm here with my brother, Lord Willin.
Greetings, salutations, everybody.
What up?
How's it going?
Good, bro. Good. I can't complain. The snow melted, so that's good.
Yeah, and you shouldn't complain even if you could.
Why? I got a snow blow and shit.
Oh, that's true.
But good guest today, all the way from Maine.
Yes.
Geri Vistein.
Yes, carnivore conservation biologist.
Jerry, how are you?
How are you doing?
Very well. Thank you. I'm happy to be here with you.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for coming on. The name of the name of your organization, is it Coyote Lives in Maine or Coyote Center? I wasn't exactly sure.
So the name of my nonprofit, I'm a conservation biologist. It's a long one because I just had to get everything in on it. So is Coyote Center for Carnivore Ecology and Coexistence.
Okay, very good.
The short's Coyote Center, okay? And Coyote Lives in Maine is our website for the Coyote Center. So it's a little bit different. So it has a different name, but it's the website for our Coyote Center, yes.
Okay, gotcha. Very good. And you want to give out the web address for anyone out there?
Sure. So the web address is www.coyotelivesinmaine.org.
Okay, .org. Very good. So coyotelivesinmaine.org. Everyone check that out.
Right. And I also want to share with everyone, because not everyone listening is in Maine, without a doubt, is that I have Coyote Lives in Maine, created for the people of Maine, but also really most especially for people all over the East. So you can put in there Coyote, so you can think for yourself, well, I'm putting Coyote Lives in Maine, but you can also say, I'm putting Coyote Lives in Rhode Island. Coyote Lives in New Jersey, okay? Because everything that's there is for our people.
Okay, cool, very good. Now, let me say how I found you guys real quick. Is I recently had an experience with, I guess, what you would call I don't know if it's a Coywolf or a coyote. We'll get into that. But I've actually had two in the last couple of years. But the last one was pretty up close and personal. The first one was I was driving home one night from work, and something crossed the street, and it wasn't. I thought it was a dog at first, but I think it was what I saw a couple weeks ago. It was actually Christmas Eve. I was sitting in my car. I just got off the phone. It was about 2 a.m. and I looked out of the corner of my eye, and something appeared. And at first, for a second, I was like, oh, maybe that's a dog. But upon further inspection, I'm like, that's not a dog. I said, in my head, I'm like...
It's a husky.
Yeah, well, that's what he said. He said, was it a husky? And I was like, dude, I don't think it was a husky either.
I see the video. It definitely was not a husky.
And I was able to get on video, which I can send you if you want. But I was like, that's not a husky. And it was interesting because it was in the middle of the street. And I live in the city. I live right in the city, in Providence, right in the city, a very urban area. And it was like it picked up some trash or whatever, and then I was in my car and I didn't want to get out of the car, so I turned my car lights on and I started recording it, and it saw me and it went into one of the yards nearby, and I pulled out of my car and I drove and I pulled up next to the yard, and it was in the yard looking at me, and this lasted a couple of minutes, and then it decided to go back onto the street. It went up the street, and then I turned around, and I started following it slowly, and it went into one of my neighbor's driveways, and it went all the way to the end of the driveway, so I stopped my car. I started filming again, It turned around and looked at me. It was just looking at me. And then after maybe a minute or two, it started coming forward, like towards my car. And it was, and then it just went back towards like the main street where it had come from. So I don't know.
Should have gave it an Atkins bar.
Yeah, very funny. But
so how did that all make you feel? How that experience? What did that feel like to you? That experience?
I thought it was a great experience. I've never seen anything like that up close, that close.
Especially in the area that he's in, Jerry.
Yeah,
it's very, very, it's urban. Like,
very urban.
I mean, maybe that might have play some sort of part into it.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like more of a body of.
There's a golf course nearby. I don't know, maybe if that's where it came from. There are some little wooded areas, like clusters of woods. You know what I'm saying? But for the most part, it's the city. But it was cool to see that up close and personal. I mean, I'm sure if you live in the wooded areas, I've heard stories of people in Rhode Island that live in wooded areas that have seen them and that encounter them pretty frequently, but I never had. So I was like, wow, and I already liked wolves and stuff. So this kind of like just further like sparked my interest, you know what I mean? And that's why I posted the picture, and then the person that operates our Instagram liked it and commented on it. So then I said, hey, we started doing this podcast a couple months ago during the pandemic. And I said, you know what? It would be cool to get somebody on that's like an expert on coyotes.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you so much. I love doing this, Chris and Rob. That's part of my work. I'm the Conservation Biologist, and I love working with people and sharing these experiences. And the coyotes are just an amazing wild canine. They truly, truly are. And of course, because when you saw them, that's coyote time. So in really urban areas, that's what the night belongs to coyote during urban times. And that's when they're out there doing rodent patrol. So they are really big on doing rodent patrol in urban areas. So when everybody's sleeping, they're getting rodents. That's what they're looking for a lot.
They're eating, feeding.
That's their favorite food. Actually, I mean, once in a while trash, but what research has shown that coyotes aren't into trash that much. They don't really like it unless they're really, really hungry. They prefer to hunt their own wild food.
Really?
Which is rodents. And so in urban areas, oftentimes, we humans, we kind of go, out there, that's wild, and where we live, it's not. And therefore, it's not an ecosystem. But wherever we are on our planet Earth is an ecosystem of some kind. And this wild canine can adapt to any ecosystem. They're one of the future. They are the wild canine in the future that's capable of doing this, And that you mentioned, there's a cemetery nearby, small little forest, and those become their refuge. So during the daytime, when people are out and about, then they go there, and that's their safe space. They will have dens in cemeteries.
Yeah.
They don't look at. On golf course, they don't see golf courses as a golf course.
Right.
It's kind of natural area,
Yeah.
right? It's a natural area for them, and there are forests and things like that, and so there's ponds and things. So that for them, these are the places that in very urban areas actually are their refuges, and they will always tend to have a place, even in the most urban areas, as their refuge, green places and cities. Yes.
Yes. I want to bring up something. I don't live in an urban area like Chris does. I live in the kind of like not the woods, but pretty much. I have 2 bodies of water right next to me.
And there's woods all around.
Yeah, and there's woods all around. And my neighbor's I've seen 3. I don't know if they were wolves or coyotes, but 2 of them actually during the daytime chased my neighbor into the house, and that was during the daytime. So I found that weird, whether it would be a wolf or a coyote or a hybrid. For them to be out during the daytime is kind of weird, I think, or I thought it would have been.
Well, actually, in areas where they feel safe, coyotes actually, people think that they are nocturnal. They're not nocturnal at all. They're not like owls, nocturnal. They're actually. And we've seen that with a lot of large carnivores, like the tigers in India. What's happening is because of the presence of people, they will tend to do more of their hunting in during the night. And so, but in places where they feel safer to be out during the day, which is they like to be out during the day like we do too. Really, they do. So you're in a more natural area there, Rob, where they will tend to be out more. In the cities, it's a different story.
They feel kind of like a little more safe, like you were saying. Yeah.
And the other part, Rob, the other part, Rob, pardon me, is that it sounds like where you live is like this ideal habitat for them, because anywhere there's waterways like that, there's lots of rodents around waterways. And really good for coyotes, really good food for coyotes in those particular areas. So for them to be out during the day is very, very nice, especially from about April all the way through September, because that's the time of the year when they're having their pups and bringing up their pups. And they have to hunt day and night for them.
All right.
So it keeps parents real busy. You see them more often.
That makes sense.
Now, Jerry, I have a question about where I live. Now, there are a lot of rabbits. Would that attract the coyotes?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Those rabbits, any kind of small herbivore, coyotes are definitely a coyote's prey.
Okay.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, I wondered if that was maybe the reason that they were in the neighborhood, because there's a bunch of there's rabbits all over the place.
Yes. They'll do it for rabbits. Yeah.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Mm-hmm. What they'll do is they'll balance those rabbit population out, because rabbits can procreate very quickly and very speedily and very often. And so coyotes will just balance their populations out, because it's important to balance herbivore populations out, because they eat up the green things very quickly. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, that's what I thought, so I'm glad you reinforced that.
Jerry, do you want to get into your background a little bit? How did you get into the whole coyote world, I guess you would say, or
yeah, being a conservation biologist in general.
So I went back to school to be a conservation biologist as an adult, and I'm very glad I did.
Okay.
Because as I grew in time and I saw how things were happening, and people's concepts of carnivores were so much of fear and so much of real antagonistic towards these beautiful wild canines, and I couldn't understand that. And I wanted this is something that I would want to be a medium between the science and our people in the community. So I went back to school to kind of be a biologist that's kind of in between the two, what we know in our science and the people in the community who are living with them. Yeah. So I went back to school at the University of Montana in Missoula, where you have a full cadre of carnivores out there at this time. We have many here in Maine too, and so I learned a great deal about wolves out there. I was very interested in that, but I also learned a great deal of about coyotes. So I learned very much about them. I started to when I was out there, and I became more and more like wow, what an amazing carnivore we have that's lived on this planet for our American continent for over 5 million years, and has outlived the mastodons, all the great cats, and the dire wolves, and they're still here. And so, and I love Maine. I'm not originally from Maine. I'm from Ohio, but I lived in Maine for about 29 years. I love it here. And when I came, and I wanted to come back after I was finished school, after my master's when I was in Vermont. But I found that people were saying, well, we want to bring the wolves back here to Maine. I want to be the wolves. And I'm looking, who's here? Who is here? Little wolf, coyote. And yet people fear them. They had no knowledge of them. And then because they came after all the historical events that happened, and people in our times don't really know anything about them. So I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to be this interim. And so a great deal of my work is education, but very creative education. And I'm all over the place. I travel all over Maine, from all the way to Fort Kent and the Canadian border, down to, the Scottish River that goes up to New Hampshire and all. And I had amazing experiences with people and their experiences with coyotes. And so that's basically, in a nutshell, what my background is, and I work with children and educators, and artists and musicians.
Oh, very cool.
I really like working with the arts.
Well, I'm a music. Not to cut you off, but I'm a musician. So if you need any music, let me know.
Okay, thank you. Well, I love music and I love the arts, and it's part and parcel of who we are as humans. I mean, it's very much a part of who we are. I mean, and Aboriginal people using the drums is that heartbeat, our heartbeat, our heartbeat. And so it's just part and parcel, and all the melodies and rhythms that we hear in nature are just, we express that in our nature. We've been doing it, since we've been human. So I love using the arts and I shouldn't say using, but incorporating the arts into reaching and touching out to people in community, because the big brain is not the only part of who we are as humans. It's all of us. There's a whole other part of us. And the arts touches that part. And music. I work with an amazing musicians here in Maine, and we've done some really creative, wonderful things with it too. And of course, Coyote is named the song dog.
Oh,
so they're known. Yes, they're often called the song dog, and they're often referred to, and I refer to them as the jazz singers. So they are quite the jazz singers. And if you have the difference between the wolves, who have this low tone, really, very beautiful low tone, and then comes Coyote, yip, 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 and they're all, they have this, and it's their language. It's just an amazing language. A lot of it is celebration of who they are as part of it. I love using all these different facets and play acting with children. We're out in nature and they get to be coyotes. And how do you teach children? Well, you get them to be it. Incorporate that. And I work with adults here in Maine as well too, of working with them to also be a voice for them, because coyotes, though they are so amazing, they are very unknown, and there's a great deal of fear that's put on them, and therefore they're highly persecuted today, all over the country. And it's basically what it comes to. It's this really left over from what the Europeans brought when they first came here 500 years ago. So there's still a great deal of the idea of the wolf being the devil. Then that's kind of what they brought here. And it's, believe it or not, it's very alive and well. And so when coyotes expanded their range after all 2 million wolves were killed in the last 3 centuries, and coyotes returned to the east, to people who knew nothing about them, we started the whole thing all over again, And so that's what we're striving to do, is really recognizing wow, we need them, we want their presence here. So it's, and of course it's different. There's people in urban areas, people in suburban areas, and people in rural areas. So we all live in different areas, and they have different relationships or different, what should I say, feelings about our relationship with the planet and with other life. And everyone's different, and every person has a different perspective. And of course, each one of us living recognizes that, we all are very, very different that way. And so in urban areas where coyotes these are the last places where coyotes have dispersed. It's very, very new in urban areas. And so coyotes stay very, very hidden. And actually, research show they don't even howl that much in urban areas. They really adapt their behavior to where they live. And so helping people in urban areas to recognize that where they live is an ecosystem, and coyotes are there, and they're there to help. They're there to help the ecosystem be healthy. Do you have any questions about people in urban areas? Any thoughts that you want to ask me instead? Because I can go on and on.
Yeah, no, definitely. I was just letting you talk there. But one thing I wanted to bring up too is, historically speaking, the coyote had a strong connection to Native Americans, right? Oh,
yes, and continue to. Yes, they do.
What can you tell me what the howling is actually? What is that for? I don't really actually know, but
The howling.
yeah.
Well, I'll say
'Cause you said
two
they're
things.
not. Yep, go ahead. They're not doing it in urban areas, you were saying, but what is it? What is it? Yeah, what is it for? Is it to like show?
So the howling. So they're howling. So two things I'll answer your two questions. There's two of them. There is the relationship with our native peoples, Aboriginal peoples here. Yes, and then when humans have only lived on these American continents for about the last 17,000 years. And of course, coyote's been here for 5 million years. Mm-hmm. And so when the Aboriginal people came from Asia across the Bering Strait during towards the end of the last glacial area, they come down into these areas, from, say, in North America, from Chicago all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And who do they find? This little wild dog, okay? Coyotes. And so because they lived so close to the land, they got to know this native wild dog. And of course, there are a lot of other carnivores there too. But they recognized after living with them for a while, their intelligence, their benevolence to them. They have stories that they pass on, and they aren't just stories, it's oral tradition of coyotes' benevolence to them and protecting them and keeping them safe. So the relationship our native peoples on the American continent had with coyotes was one of respect and wonder and awe. And very, very different than when the Europeans came. They brought the idea of the wolf being the devil, and that was true, real. I mean, that was real to them. And so you look at coyote, the Europeans, when the first times they saw coyotes out in the prairies as they're going west, they look at the coyote, they call them the little prairie wolf. So they didn't realize that coyote, they considered the little wolf, which basically we humans give canines their names. But they're all wild canines. They just play different roles in the ecosystem. And so it's very, very different. But our native peoples today still, in the cult, and those who really follow their culture, have the greatest respect for coyotes and consider them the teacher. And some of your authors of our native peoples call coyote the teacher. So when coyote appears to you, so Chris, so one of our native elders, I spoke to him about 2 months ago in New Mexico, and I asked him, I started talking about the relationship of when, us humans relating with them. And he said, when coyote comes to you, okay, coyotes come to teach you something. That was the answer. Coyote's the teacher.
Yeah.
And we have our Penobscot native peoples here in Maine, and they see, that the carnivore as this teacher, this very respectful relationship that they have. It's a very different kind of worldview that's alive in those who really follow their culture today. And it's a real teaching thing for us because actually the Aboriginal way, and I use the word Aboriginal with the greatest respect because oftentimes that's how they want to be referred to, because Aboriginal means the first people. And they were the first people on the continent, that they saw their relationship with the landscape, that they were part of it all. They weren't separate from it all and treated all with that kind of same respect. So it's a way for us and our culture, what we're learning from them. Now, your other question about coyote howling, when I give my talks, people always ask me the first time to say, is coyote howling because they had to kill? That's their first response, And we say that's exactly not the reason why. They actually, a professor of University of Vermont, he did his doctorate in Berkeley, California on coyote howling. That's 6 years. And he said when he was finished, he barely touched the tip of the iceberg. So we know very little about them because it's actually their language, and they've evolved it over 5 million years. But we are learning some of the things. So there's 3 major things that I tell people that we know now why coyote howls, and one of them is territorialness. So, most life is territorial. Wild canines, they're definitely territorial. The reason being, it's survival. And survival is all about food. And guess what? We humans, we're territorial too, are we not?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
Totally we are. And we're territorial too. Okay, and so what coyotes do is when people hear howling in the evening or during the nighttime, oftentimes that's a territorial work is basically what they're letting other coyotes that may be in a territory near them. We're here. We want to let you know we're here.
Yeah, stay out.
This is our
Stay
territory.
out. Stay out. So it's very, because humans cannot see the homes of coyotes, which is really their territory. Only one family of coyotes lives there. No other coyotes live there. So if you have a coyote of 6 coyotes and they live in a territory at 30 square miles, not a single other coyote lives there but them. Okay. And now in cities, it's different because there's a lot of food in cities for coyotes because of humans. And the biggest food is rodents. So their territories tend to be smaller from what we've seen in research in city areas. So it could be 10 city blocks or 20 city blocks or a square mile there, but they tend to be quieter. I imagine that many people in urban areas do not hear coyotes cry. It's just something we found that it's like, we ought to be quiet here. Yeah. The humans will hear us, so they just don't do it. We still don't understand why they decided not to do that. There's a lot of research in Chicago, on that. Yeah.
Let me just say, I've heard at times like strange sounds, and I was like, "What is that?" Now it makes me wonder if yes, people have said fish a cat before too, but it also makes me wonder, could it have been coyotes howling? Now that I've seen them in the area, it makes me think, maybe that's what it was.
The worst sound in the world is a cat in heat. Just going off topic, but that's a terrible sound.
No, and it could be. And I'm not saying that they howl in cities because every coyote is unique and every coyote family is unique too. And if you hear calls during the night like that, especially in the summertime, where you tend to be able to hear it more than in winter, with windows closed. But it really depends upon the individual. Every single coyote is a unique personality, totally. They really are very, very different. And now in rural areas, the same thing. People will tend to hear them howling back and forth more. And when you're in the West, people will hear them from one big area howling to another big area, and the 2 different coyote families are howling to each other. And I always tell people, coyotes don't make war. They communicate with each other. They communicate. And so because they talk to each other and say, this is my territory, and they say, well, this one's ours, they're in peace. They don't waste their time doing war. They're highly socialized species, much that we can learn from. Another reason why coyotes howl, I always tease people about this, is they don't have cell phones, and so, they don't have cell phones, and of course they don't need them. Now, this is interesting with us humans, how, all of us have given different gifts, and how we are created on this planet. And so with us, we have our brain and we have our eyes. But with wild canines, especially coyotes, they have literally radar ears. And if you've ever seen the coyotes, that is something that's very specific, and it's a coyote. Their ears are too big for their head. You know what I mean? But nature created it that way. If you ever see the pups, because they even grow into their ears, they have radar ears, so that moist evening, a coyote howling 3 miles away, their family can hear them. Isn't that something?
That's
so
amazing.
They can hear and communicate. They know who is communicating with them. They know what they're saying, and they know if they should come or not.
Wow.
So it's a very, very fascinating world that they live in communication. And again, it's their language. They are speaking with each other and talking with each other about whatever needs to be said. So, and the last one, which you hear frequently, and the one that that piece that I sent to you, Chris and Rob, is that they love to sing, and you can relate to that because you're musicians.
Yes.
They actually love to sing, and so part of it is the celebration of who they are. And so, anthropologists say that the way we humans, our whole social system is that we have a mother and we have a father and we have pups, and they grow up and then we disperse. That whole way and we learn from the elders, that whole cultural system in which we as humans live, we learned from wolves. way, way back when we domesticated them and they became our dogs. Okay. And so we've learned from them that that works for us, not the primate ancestors. So we do not do a social system like a primate ancestors. We do a social system as humans the way canines do. It's a family situation, which you have the mates, okay? And so, and it's a very, very close-knit, very, very close. Family means everything to them, just like our families mean everything to us, especially close-knit human families. And so they love celebrating it. They love celebrating it. And so you can, you can tell from some of their howling that it is really happy. And it's
playful.
And very playful and very exciting. So I always tell people when I give talks here in Maine, it's kind of, you have coyotes kind of regularly howling, kind of listen, what do you think? Which one of those do you think they're doing there? So it is. It's a whole language, a whole part of who they are. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, that's very cool. I didn't realize all that, and thank you for sharing. That was great. Where on the planet did the coyote originate? Was it in the south or the west?
So that's another great question. Okay, so coyotes, are at least 5 million years old, and they've lived nowhere else on the whole planet Earth but in North America. So they originated here. They are about as native a species as there come. Okay, and they originated here in North America, and they have lived here, like I said, for over 5 million years. However, because they've been here so long, things on the planet Earth have been happening in ecological time, namely the glaciers, okay, namely humans' presence, and the glaciers had a big effect on that because when the glaciers especially came down in North America and Northeast America, we're talking mile deep glaciers that stayed for a very long time. And what happens is when the glaciers come, that shifts all the life. So any animals or wildlife or anything that were living in those areas as the glaciers came, they had to move. Okay, and they probably move south and then west or into the prairie areas. And then as the glaciers receded, then you had humans coming over the Bering Strait and a lot of other species coming, like the gray wolf came back from Asia then, okay? So coyotes were originally here, and they've always been here. And they've mostly been here, in Mexico. They've always been in Mexico. And that's actually where coyote got his name. The ancient Aztecs named coyote, and they spell it in their ancient language, Coyotl.
Wow.
A little different.
Yeah, that's I couldn't even pronounce that.
And pronounced coyote. Coyote. So in their language, it is pronounced coyote. And coyote's name is very significant. So it's one of those rare species that has been named by our native people and has always been used, means the trickster. And so Europeans think of trickster as a funny little creature, but native peoples didn't see him that way. They were almost a semigod. They kind of played this really important role between themselves and this whole spiritual realm. So coyotes play a really almost a kind of a deeply spiritual relationship with native peoples, and that went on. That evolved when native peoples arrived in North America. Which I wish I could have been around, don't you? I wish I could have around.
Oh, yeah.
See that? It was very, very fascinating, very, very fascinating, and to see that kind of culture, which it's not known to us, but with the more that we can learn and imbibe it in our culture, the richer we will be, I wanted to share, you brought up another question that people often use the term coy wolf, coy dog, coy, all those. So, when the Europeans came, when I give my talks, I bring a lot of history and anthropology into my talks. And we know more and more that in the sciences, if you just stay with one science and you're really not incorporating all the sciences, you're really leaving a lot out. And so I bring history in a great deal because history has a great deal to do with our relationship with large, powerful carnivores. Yeah, history has a lot to do with it, with our relationship. And so when the Europeans came, like I said, they had basically annihilated all carnivores from Europe. The last ones went into the Alps and Pyrenees and Eastern Europe. So when they came here we had this whole continent full of these great carnivores of wolves and cougars and grizzly bears, and all these great avian carnivores of golden eagles and all. And of course, they swiftly from the Atlantic to the Pacific slaughtered many of them. Actually, the century in the 1800s is considered the age of extermination. And so within 400 years, every last wolf on the North American continent was killed. 2 million of them.
Jerry, what were they killing them for?
Yeah, I was going to ask that too.
Was it trapping, like for food, or for like trading fur, or
is it because they were attacking their livestock?
Well, number one is fear. Okay, because you imagine you come from Europe. I'm coming from Europe, and a lot of these people came from Europe. No, they came from urban areas. They weren't farmers. They were just forced to be farmers when they got here. And so they came and they had no experience of them other than their medieval concept of the wolf being the devil.
Yep.
So they fear them. And
your bad rap.
Yeah.
Right. And not only that, but we as humans way back in Africa, we were living in these areas where it was only us and these powerful, powerful beasts with powerful teeth and powerful claws. So it's deep in our DNA, and actually sociologists and paleontologists are saying this. It's deep in our DNA to have fear of species that are powerful carnivores. Okay, it's in our DNA. It's in our DNA. But if you don't know anything about them and you turn that fear into that they are evil, what happens with human behavior? But if you have the fear and you respect them and know how to live with them, that's a different story. But that didn't happen with the Europeans, you see. So when they came here, their thing was to wipe them out because they feared them terribly. And they also, it's interesting, is our native peoples, they never had domestic livestock. They couldn't understand what the Europeans were doing. The only domestic ones that native people had were their dogs. And of course, their dogs were half wild. They were very, so they didn't, and so the whole experience of carnivores with domestic livestock was unknown on the American continent before Europeans came here. And so what happened was, what happened is when the Europeans came, they didn't do really good farming, animal husbandry. They didn't protect them at all. And so you had carnivores, which they were killing, and there was a great deal of disruption that went on in their lives, needless to say, of these very ordered lives. Carnivores live very ordered social lives, and there's just chaos put into their lives when the Europeans came with habitat destruction. Notice here in Maine is considered the most forested state in the Union, more than Alaska. Okay.
Really?
And yes, and by the early 1900s, Maine was clear cut, literally clear cut. You wouldn't recognize it, and that's way across the country. And so they totally took away habitat, their prey, and so they're surrounded by these domestic livestock. So yeah, they were starving to death, and they were killing livestock because they needed to survive. And of course, then that went on as they went across the country. But there's no animal husbandry practices, zero knowledge of understanding the value of carnivores. And everything happened so fast. Do you know, Chris, Rob? It happened fast. I mean, Lewis and Clark went across the American continent in 1805. That's not that long ago.
No, not at all.
And before that time, there were next to very few humans west of the Appalachians. And so in that short period of time, really fast, there's a strong movement. And what happens is tremendous destruction and killing and bringing in a humongous number of livestock. And it became a very big money thing. The British and also Wall Street here in New York, right away they thought, this is going to be big money. This is going to be big money. And so everybody else had to be clear out of the prairies. Everybody else had to go. So it was it was a very tragic time in our history. And we're still feeling it, though. And we're going to be feeling it for a long time, all of that. So there's a lot of, we're going through actually a time right now of tremendous, wonderful transition. We're doing a shift. We're learning more. We're having a consciousness that's different. You and I wouldn't be having this conversation 50 years ago.
Yeah, right.
We wouldn't.
Right.
We wouldn't. And I'm finding my work people, I feel like people have this, they're curious. They delight when they hear coyotes howling. They love it when the hair on the neck goes back up, or when they see one, it's, oh, wow. Very, very different. Very, very different. We have farmers here in Maine who want coyotes on their farm because they know their farm's an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And they want it balanced. And so we're seeing this wonderful transition, but it's slow. You see.
No, go ahead.
So what? Yeah. Go ahead.
Were there any wolves or anything similar in Europe at that time, like before they came over?
Right. Most of the wolves that were in Europe by the time they came over, usually by 1500, they say wild carnivores are gone, period, from Europe, okay? Really? 1500.
Wow.
But where they were, way up in the Pyrenees Mountains, where no humans were, okay? Way up in the Alps, where no humans were, and way, way eastern Europe, where you had shepherds who were transient, doing the sheep. Very rare. That was it. All Western Europe, there was no carnivores at all.
Wow.
And they did away with the bears. They did away with their wildcats. They call them their wildcats. Oh, big time. And so when you can imagine them coming to North America, there's all these carnivores.
Why did they get rid of the bears and the cats and everything else?
They're powerful carnivores. Cats are powerful carnivores.
Oh, yeah,
like mountain
absolutely.
lions,
Yeah.
bobcats. Like we have bobcats in Maine. They are powerful carnivores in their own right. They're as beautiful as all get out. They're powerful carnivores, and they have to be. They have to be in order to survive. But so that's how it was in Europe. And so coming here, when we're talking about the two different cultures, we have our native cultures where they just lived among these powerful carnivores and respected them. They weren't sitting around petting them. You see what I mean? They weren't their pets. There was this understanding of that separation, but it was one of respect, and living among them, that we are all one. The European worldview is totally different. And also is only that we humans belong here and our livestock, and none of you do. It's a very different worldview, and it's very much alive and well today. And I've had experiences here in Maine, a couple of our towns, where there were coyotes there and in some neighborhoods that were newly built up. And some of the people were demanding, well, all these coyotes trapped out of my town, and take them out there in the wilderness, get them out of here, Sorry, that's not the way it works anymore. It's not how life is to be. Yeah. We are all one. So it's this concept. They live out in the wild and we live here. And if we live like that, because humans have taken over a huge part of the planet, we will have a very unhealthy planet. Because if where we live as humans isn't really habitat healthy, where we have birds and bees and butterflies and pollinators and carnivores and their prey, that creates a healthy ecosystem for our human communities. So it's a whole piece of transition time where we're learning that this is cool. And, you have a wonderful professor at the University of Rhode Island, who is an entomologist, Dr. Doug Ptolemy, and he gives talks about taking your yard wherever you are and create it to a place where it's good for wildlife. So you don't have these perfect lawns that are covered with pesticide and nothing else, because that's a desert for wildlife. So he's teaching people that creating ecosystems on your own, you see. But you want me to get back to about the idea of the Coywolf too?
Yeah.
See, there's so much to all this, isn't
No,
there?
I
There's a lot
know.
to-
So let me just say, when I had that first experience, like 2 years ago, or maybe a year ago, whatever it was, someone had mentioned to me, "Yeah, man, that was probably a coy wolf," and I never heard that term before. And they were like, "Yeah, it's basically a hybrid of a wolf and a coyote. They've been spotted in Boston and all along the Northeast." And I was like, "Really?" So I looked into it a little bit, and then after this past experience, I've been researching it even more. I watched a couple documentaries, listened to a couple interviews. So can you speak on the hybridization of coyote and wolf, and just get into that whole thing, the term coy wolf, and I've heard eastern coyote and all different things.
Sure. So it all starts with, again, you go in kind of the ancient history of canines on the American continent, okay? Because it's really important that we go beyond our own human lives, because canines are a species that are very, very different than a lot of other species, okay? They tend to be able to mate with each other. So a coyote can mate with an Algonquin wolf, okay? That's an Algonquin national provincial park in Canada. They can mate with them. Other species, any kind of a diversity like that, they can't do it. But canines can. And they've been mixing and intermixing and mixing and intermixing for millennia. And so they're really good at that, especially coyotes and American wolves. So we have American wolves, which are wolves like the Algonquin wolves in Algonquin Provincial Park, which most probably were the wolves that lived all along the eastern seaboard. So they've been living in Rhode Island too. Okay, so they're American wolves, and they like coyotes have never lived anywhere else but in North America. Okay, and so we believe, so much has been destroyed, but we kind of done from anthropology and DNA studies where that the American wolf, the Algonquin wolf, shot off, and so also the red wolf that we see in the Carolinas that are hanging on by a thread down there, that they're kind of the same. You just give them different names. Each one is that they shot off from an ancient coyote maybe 50,000 years ago. So in ecological time, 50,000 years is nothing, So they're very, very close to each other. The gray wolf that we see in northern Quebec and all of northern Canada, and again the Western Europe, Western United States that have been reintroduced, those wolves were here. Then they went over to Asia, over the Bering Strait during one of the glacial times, and stayed over there for a couple million years. And then they came back again. So they don't mate with coyotes. They can mate with eastern wolves. So you can see that complexity there. So what happened with coyotes, when 2 million wolves were killed across the American continent in less than 200 years, coyotes stayed kind of like when the Europeans came, coyotes were basically between the areas around Indiana and the Rocky Mountains, down all the way down into Mexico and Saskatchewan, Canada. Okay, so that's kind of like where they were because of glacial areas too. And there were wolves as well. Okay. And so when 2 million wolves were killed, and the reason being is, so as long as the wolves were present all around there, especially in the eastern forest, so the wolves take up the eastern forest after the glaciers were gone, and took off into the mountains of the Rocky Mountains down into Mexico, the Mexican wolves. Wherever wolves were, coyotes were not. Territorialness. Wolves would kill coyotes because they're the big guys, okay? They're the big canines. They do not tolerate coyotes' presence because they see them as a competitor for survival. And so, but when all the wolves were killed, that gave coyotes the freedom to expand their range. And that's what they did. Plus, what we're really learning a lot now too is that there is tremendous persecution that was going on during the age of extermination, the 1800s. And so coyotes were running for their lives basically too. And our coyotes that came into New England, so Rhode Island, okay, they came up through the Great Lakes. Okay, and we know from DNA studies again is that they were females, and they were traveling north into Canada, and they're coming into southern Ontario, and they come up to the area around Algonquin Provincial Park where the Algonquin wolves live. And there's no other country in the world that did all-in-all extermination of its native carnivores like the United States. There's never a country in the world ever has. Even Canada did that. But Canada's not really good to their wolves either. So there was a lot of hunting and trapping. So threw them into chaos. So here comes these female coyotes. I kind of play, I get my theatricals when I give my talks. So the females, they're coming. Here's these male wolves. Yeah. And here's these male wolves. They can't find a mate. So they do mate. So they mate. And so the mother, the coyote is the mother. The father is an Algonquin wolf. Okay. So what does that make them? Okay. Know that these species have been interacting with each other for ecological time on the American continent. But we humans, we want to give them a name. They've got to have a name.
Right.
We tend to like to organize our world. We have to organize it. We try to put, and that's part of our humanity. And sometimes it's a good thing, but other times we're trying to organize a bit too much to a point where we're not really the marvelous, wondrous grandeur of all the complexity you can put into that name. And that's really what this is about. So a lot of research has been done on that. And we're finding more and more that what happened up there was nature's way of saying, we will survive no matter what. No matter what humans do, we will find a way to survive. So what happens is coyotes come who are the absolute survivalists. They take into themselves a little bit of these wolf genetics that once lived here where you and I live. And they're bringing it back down. They're bringing it back down. Are they wolves? No, they're not. They're coyotes through and through. We call them eastern coyotes because of that. Well, how are they different? Physically, what we're seeing is that the large bone in the top of their head is larger, and their jaws, bones are larger, which equips them with the genetics of the wolf to be able to take on the prey that they need to take on as the role of a keystone carnivore here, which is the role they do play. Okay. However, through and through, everything else about them, coyote through and through. Now, depending upon where you live, but every single one of them has bits and pieces of wolf genetics. So they're not all have the same percentage of it. Most of their percentage is all coyote. You have these bits and pieces. And because it's the mother, there's a whole complexity to genetics, which is extremely difficult to explain. But because she's the mother, they are coyotes, period. It has a lot to do with her motherness of spreading out the genetics. But what we're seeing and what we're more and more, a lot of science has been doing in Canada, in Ontario, scientists have done tremendous research, and some here in Maine too, is that we're seeing that this amazing canine of the future, basically, who can live among us humans, it has the potential to be a major carnivore at the same time. But it has the personality and the social structure and a relationship that they've had with humans for over 17,000 years. They still have that. It's a very different kind of relationship than wolves have had. And so it's like we're seeing this evolvement of the species that is going to absolutely be able to survive in a human-dominated world right in the middle of our cities that you yourself experience, Chris, which is so cool.
Yeah.
So cool. And so a young biologist in Boston, and he's a friend of mine, he's done all his master's and doctorate research on coyotes in Boston. Scientists who do research for long periods of time on species become enamored by them because you not be. You're just overwhelmed by how amazing nature is and how our wildlife is. He decided he's going to call them Coywolves.
Okay.
But most of our biologists do not like that term at all because it's not really true. Because these are coyotes through and through, truly coyote. The other piece is that people get really confused. First, I'm just trying to figure out who a coyote is with, and then I'm going to get this word Coywolf in there, and I don't even know what that means. So it confuses people, and the genetics is so complex. You can't even begin to start explaining that part. So, and the whole sense of speciesism is so complex as well. I always call them Eastern coyotes, always, because that's who they are. Or you can really say coyote is coyote. Coyote is coyote. They are that through and through. Does that sound like a kind of an explanation?
Yes.
It's going to share that historical perspective and the complexity of it all. And it's going to, the part that's really cool is fellow biologists I know says coyotes keep recreating themselves. So they're going to keep recreating. Who knows what they're going to keep doing?
Recreating.
Yeah, exactly. Evolving.
And you're just like, you are artists, you are musicians, you know what I'm saying by that. It's creating. You are very, very creative people. Who knows what you come up with next, okay?
That's true.
So it's the same thing with them. They're not static. They are not a static species. They are just this alive species that's constantly responding to the world around them. Yeah. The other piece, though, is that we humans, boy, we've got to run to catch up. And, of course, we're way behind. And so a lot of people fear them because they just
don't understand.
Because that's very ingrained. When you don't have knowledge, you fear. And when humans fear, you know what happens. And we do that with our fellow humans, too.
Geri, I have a question for you. You brought up earlier about the hair standing back up on coyotes' necks or their body. What is that? Is it always a negative or an aggressive thing, or is it just something that they do? They react differently, either if they're happy or if they're being aggression.
Say that again. Ask me the question again, so I didn't catch that.
You brought up earlier about how their neck, the hairs on their back and stuff stand up. Is that always a negative or like an aggression thing?
Oh no, I'm talking about the hair on the back of our neck.
Yeah, that's
our necks.
I had a man talk to me in one of my talks. He says he had this experience of just being able to see it, something like what you saw, Chris. And he says the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I responded, they never know what's going to come out of my mouth, because I said, wasn't that a fantastic experience? Because what you are experiencing is something very ancient in you. It's the flight or flight thing. It's recognizing a powerful being. And it's like your domestication goes right out the window, and you are experiencing wildness. And that is cool.
Goosebumps.
That is cool. And I think when people here in Maine tell me their experiences where they've seen a coyote in the wild, we have such a connection as humans that we're not aware of our relationship with other life on the planet, that there's this excitement of this wow. And that makes our lives rich. And when we can learn more, become understanding and aware of understanding coexistence, our role we should be playing with them, that's how our lives become. But we got a ways to go. So teaching people how coyotes see your dog, for instance, in urban areas, okay? Or how your coyote sees your cat. So I hear that all the time. So that's a big piece. So when coyote sees your dog, they don't say, that is Chris's dog. No, they don't. They say, that's another canine. And they don't see anything other than that. And so depending upon the situation and depending on the dog, there's different experiences they have. Now, when they see these little fine pound dogs, they don't see them as a dog. They truly do not. They see them as prey. And so that's a whole piece of coexisting piece. of recognizing that we're living with a wild canine. And when we're living with a wild canine, we have to get behind their eyes and into their brain and see the world the way they see it, so that helps us to know how to coexist with them. And so learning the skills as humans to live well with them is a whole new thing. And that's one of the things that I strive to help our people with. So that otherwise, if you don't have the skills, negative things can happen and coyotes end up dying. And also innocent animals do too. And so what we're striving, and that's the challenging part too, that they're living on it, but we have to know how. And that's what I said, Chris and Rob, about us running to catch up. Coyotes know how to live with us. You just don't know how to live with them yet.
Right.
And a lot, and there's a lot of habits that have been created over the past generations because carnivores have not been present. And one of them is to let cats just roam the countryside and breed up the yin-yang. So we have feral cats all over, tens of thousands of them being euthanized in our shelters that people don't see, okay? The greater responsibility of understanding that as soon as your cat walks outside the door, you didn't see them, so they're predators in their own right, and that millions of our bird species are being killed by domestic cats. And so coyotes play a really important role in ecosystem health, too. They've actually done research on some of this. They actually had people in the community involved. It was really cool, where they had a lot of camera things. And it showed that cats who were left free, they would always go into forest, and they'd be killing the birds. And what happened is coyotes came, and that became their refuge, just like you were saying, in Providence. That became their refuge. And so what happened was they were finding that the cats never went there anymore. They stayed really close to where the humans, to their home. And so as a result, the bird populations of the forest increased. Oh. And so, so coyotes' presence is teaching cats, you better stay right on your porch, boy. And so, but it's a process. But when humans are in possession of a domestic animal, they don't want no one messing with them. And if someone does, the other's going to pay the price. And so what we're trying to do is educate. And so those habits, and some bird feeders are another thing. That's a really tough one. Bird feeders is another ecological thing. Don't tell me you have bird feeders, okay? But anyhow, bird feeders is another ecological thing that is really not ecological, because we're always taught, don't feed wild animals.
I'm guilty.
Rob has a bird feeder in his yard.
No, not well. I have a water thing for a bird bath, but I do feed the deer. I got probably 16 in my backyard. I've been feeding them for 3 years, 4 years now.
Okay, yeah. So
I get everything. I got everything in these woods.
Yeah,
including coyotes.
Coyotes. I got a family of foxes. Foxes are pretty cool. Foxes. I was not scared of foxes because they're little tiny things, but you never really seen them until I was here. And they play they're like little kids. I have a whole bunch of balls I throw in my backyard. They play with them, weird. They're little kids. I had a raccoon try to. Now, actually, I have a question. You might know. Do you think a raccoon would try to break into my house to eat my ferrets? Because I have a walkout basement and I had the window open, and a raccoon was trying to actually grab the handle and open my door. So I thought it might smell their feces or whatever, and attract them to that. I was wondering.
Absolutely.
I have a video actually. I'll have Chris send it to you. But yeah, weird.
We send it videos. Raccoons have learned to live among humans very well. Now they're called little mesocarnivores. Okay, they're a meso or a middle carnivore, and they have adapted to humans' trash and human food, very, very much so. And they don't think nothing about getting up in your attic.
Oh, yeah.
And if they can get in your house, they can. That's another whole piece of living with wildlife, too, is secure everything. You have some really good experiences there, Rob. And that's the thing, is that we want wildlife to stay wild, so we don't want to feed them. And so what happens with bird feeders is that the birds, the whole thing about the ecology of birds is birds that cannot make it in the winter, like here in Maine. They can't. We have 8 feet of snow where I live right now. They migrate. Okay, they go wherever they're like, all the way to South America, and then come back. Birds that can make it through the winter, like especially in northern, we have our little chickadees. They do not migrate because they know how to survive with their own food. And we have a whole number of birds that stay here, and same with in Rhode Island. Okay, so they know how to find their own food. We don't need to feed them. And if we do, guess what? They are not doing their work in the ecosystem. Birds actually play a role as insectivores and carnivores in their own right in the ecosystem. And if we're feeding them, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. The other piece, in reference to coyotes and carnivores and raccoons and skunks, is that these species of carnivores, your large ones and your small ones, see a bird feeder, and what's often under it? Oh, squirrels, rodents, all kinds. And they're like, food, humans equal food. And when you're sleeping, they're there. And so actually, then people get really, really scared. They get really, really scared because, oh my gosh, the carnivore's all the way up here on my porch. Well, what's on your porch, hanging on your porch? Bird feeder.
Yeah.
I had a woman here in Maine. She really, really likes the coyotes, and they're very protective in the neighborhood. They're backed up to a whole conservation area. And she emailed, and they saw she has coyote scat on her deck. That was too close for her. So my first question to her was, do you have a bird feeder on your deck? Yes. And as we're talking, her husband takes the bird feeder off because they said, well, you're sleeping. There's rodents all over the place. And coyotes are coming, you're drawing them right to your house.
Okay.
And what happens then, that's when sometimes conflict can happen. Because if people see the coyote or coyotes get to see humans as a source of food, they're going to draw closer and closer to you. And and that part of their wildness goes away because then they tend to be slow to become a little bit more of a beggars, and we don't want that. And so conflict happens, and when conflict happens, coyotes end up being the ones who are killed. So we strive to have people never, ever feed wildlife, period. Amen. And that is a very big transition for people today. And I also find that my experience, and I did research in Yellowstone when I was out there as well, and when I find that our culture, because we're a very urbanized culture, and one also that's very separated from nature, not everyone is, but there's a lot of that goes on, don't understand what wildness is and where the line is drawn. We tend to see any wild beings as almost how they treat animals in zoos, and that we can feed them and we can domesticate them. And so I've had the experience that have signs in Yellowstone all over, do not feed. And right underneath it, people are feeding the chipmunks, right underneath the sign. When bears are coming up the road, a grizzly bear was going up the hill in Yellowstone, and people were running after a grizzly bear. you know what I mean? You know what I mean?
A handful of corn.
That's right. And then they put their children, their five-year-old child, attempt to do it on the back of a bison.
Wow.
And with very, very serious results. And so we're seeing that. So it's what it is saying is this, where's our culture in understanding that wildness, that piece that we're all one and yet there's a separateness, and that they're wild, and wild means they find their own way in the world. They don't need us. Yeah. Even though their lives are tough, they don't need us, and we don't want them.
Us.
Exactly. They were
here way before
and
we were.
Like I said earlier, Jerry, I'm guilty, even with the deer. And I've seen it, it's been 3 or 4 years I've been here, and I had the corn feeder out there. And where it's a point where if they're actually in the yard, you can go right up to them. They're not scared at all. I mean, they'll run if you're quick, but, if you run up to them, they'll run away. But they're definitely...
Right. And you want them to have that certain sense of that too. And you want them to have, I remember when I was also in Montana, I had gone back to work just for a year in Helena. And one of the old ranchers had told me of a woman in Montana, you have the mountains and then you have the valleys. Where the food is in the winter for all the animals, including the bison too, and the elk, is in the valleys. They're not in the mountains. And so it happens, but the towns are in the valleys. So the elk are coming down, and this woman is feeding a group of, these weren't elk, they were deer. Mm-hmm. There were 5 deer, and she was feeding them. Well, it didn't take long. And those deer were at her large glass door with their hoofs, crashing it in. You know, and what that is about is that we insist that you give us food because they live on a very different world. They live on survival, life and death. And so once you start feeding them, they expect it. And then they become beggars. And they're not seeking out the kind of food the way they should be doing. Plus, we're affecting their reproduction. So the more food they get, the more they reproduce. And the more they reproduce, there's too many numbers.
Overpopulation.
And what affects is that's not healthy for them. That's not healthy for them. And so there's a whole complex system of us as scientists to teach our people that so they understand why you don't feed them, why we want kind of like here in Maine, we want coyotes to take down the deer fawns. Oh my gosh, it's Bambi! No, it's not Bambi. It's a wild deer fawn. Okay, it's a wild deer fawn, and you want the strongest, the sharpest, the fastest to survive, and no predator will get. But only the weak and not the fastest one, and that's how that predator-prey relationship creates healthy species on all levels. So it's a real, and these are all these things that are happening today and coming down on our people, and no one has learned about any of this. It's all new. And so that's what I do in my work, and that's what I love to do, because it's quite magical how Mother Nature creates these beautiful balance in our system. You know, and same here in Maine with Lyme disease is another issue. Lyme disease is an epidemic in the East. Why?
Yeah.
Carnivores are not enough carnivores, or they're being killed on a regular basis, our coyotes, and yet the deer populations are off the roof. And they are part and parcel of the Lyme disease epidemic.
Makes sense. There you have it.
And so, yes, and so there's that's another whole piece.
Yeah.
And I can go on. And I'm not sure how long you want me.
Well, no, I have some more questions if you don't mind.
Oh no, I'm happy to. That's why I thought I'd stop, because I wanted to answer your question.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to say too is, I think humans obviously have a fascination with wildlife, and then some people try to domesticate wildlife, and then the wildlife ends up turning on them. We've seen instances where that's happened, and I think it goes back to what you were talking about. Let the wildlife live in the wild, in their natural habitats and in their natural sources of food. The other thing too is, so the proper term would be eastern coyote, but there are differences between the coyotes we have here in the Northeast and the ones that are in other parts of the country, right?
Yes. So our coyotes in the West, like in New Mexico, were the ones that live in the Navajo and these areas and prairie areas, we call those the Western coyotes. And so the difference with those coyotes, they're so much like their, the Eastern counterparts, except they're smaller. So they weigh maybe around 20 pounds. Okay. And their coats are in no way as thick because they don't need to be. They live in the desert. Okay. And and their food is different than here. So rodents, rabbits, all those kinds of things are more of their food. It's very interesting. In some anthropology, it's actually shown, archaeology has shown that coyotes have this capacity to change their body size. And they've shown that when all the great mastodons and during that whole time was happening and food wasn't available to the large carnivores, that within 1,000 years, coyotes changed their body size. They got smaller. Because our coyotes today are much smaller than they were back during the time of the mastodons. They're much smaller, probably at least a third smaller.
Wolves must have been massive.
So they're smaller. And so those are our western coyotes. Our eastern coyotes, they live in a different environment. They don't live in deserts, okay? They live in a lot of the forested areas. A lot of our east, especially our northeast, we have a lot of snow. We have cold. And it's wetter. And also here in Maine, I mean, we have lots of snow and also different prey. And then they have some bit of the wolf genetics in them, which helps them to take on prey that are larger, okay, and the need to do it too. So that's really the difference. They live in different habitats, and we know that species that live in more northern climates tend to be bigger. So bears that live more north are much larger than bears that that live in warmer climates, and same with coyotes. So our coyotes here in Maine will probably may get larger and larger just because being larger will help them survive. And being a smaller coyote, they would struggle to survive, in 20 feet of snow in bitter cold winter. And so it's almost like an evolving of themselves. So we're seeing that change, you see. So that's kind of the difference between them. But when it comes to who they are, their historical culture of who they are, their social structure of how they are as a family, their howling, all that's coyote through and through. Doesn't matter where you are. Doesn't matter where you are. So they're just kind of adapted themselves to where they are. Yeah. That's all.
So they're larger. You're saying they're larger because of their habitat and their climate, not because of the wolf DNA, or is it a combination of both?
It's a combination of both. But most oftentimes, too, it is because they live in a much colder, more difficult landscape. Like here in Maine, for instance, they do upper state New York, New Brunswick, these areas, southern Quebec. They are larger. Also, they often seem larger. That they have a fur coat on is amazing. Extremely thick fur coat. While coyotes in New Mexico do not have that kind of thick coat. They won't. They don't have it. So they've adapted in that regard too. But some wolf genetics may make them larger. We're still actually learning a lot about that. We're still learning. We're in a constant state of learning. So
what do they typically weigh? What's the typical weight of eastern coyote?
So an eastern coyote can weigh anywhere between 40 and 60 pounds.
Okay.
And what happens is the coyotes that came out of Algonquin Provincial Park, and they dispersed into upper state New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, New Brunswick. These were their initial, expanding their range and down here into the eastern seaboard. And then they come into Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and then you're getting into them. Then they're mixing with coyotes that came across the Mississippi River through Indiana and Ohio, who were western coyotes who did not mate with wolves at all. So they're western coyotes. But the eastern coyotes that are coming from the north and expanding their range, because they keep expanding. Wherever there's an open niche, they're going to keep expanding their range. And so they may be meeting those that have come across the country that are has been strictly western coyotes. So there could be this mixture then all the way through the whole eastern seaboard. So it's just an evolving kind of thing. We don't know. Very much we don't know. But it's very, very fascinating. And this is all, ecological Earth history stuff, not human time. Human time is very, very short in reference to what they're about. Yeah. But it's very fascinating. It just shows how life is so dynamic on our planet,
I've also heard the term coy dog. Is that when I was doing a little bit of reading about that, where I guess it's the coyotes mating with dogs, like regular dogs? Is that really a thing?
Right. So that our dogs are, almost 99% wolf genetics in them. We think that they're our dog, but they got a lot of wolf in them, okay? Right. So they can, again, as a species, as a canine species, coyotes and wolves can breed with our domestic dogs. It's very unique in this canine species. And so when coyotes were expanding their range, remember I tell you they're expanding their range, and of course they're coming down they're coming down from Canada, okay? and they're coming into Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, there's no coyote there and no wolves either. There are dogs running around, Labradors.
Yeah.
And yeah, they can mate, and they did mate. However, coyotes have practice very strict birth control. The female can only get pregnant 4 days of the year.
Really?
4 days. That's it.
Wow.
And her mate is sterile all year except during that time. It is amazing, the birth control. They control their own populations. We just have to stay out of their way. So anyhow, however, dogs don't do that, as you well know.
Right.
So
Definitely
a female
not.
can get pregnant. Yeah, they can get pregnant anytime. A male can get her pregnant. And that's come from domestication, you see? That's come from domestication. So having a coyote and a dog mate is not a good thing, because if it's a male dog with a female coyote, he's going to split. He's gone. She's on her own. And coyotes really need each other. They need their mate for survival to bring up the pups. And oftentimes they do not live because of that. And if the female is, and same as well. So that doesn't work. And what happened is, as soon as enough coyotes dispersed out of Canada, that was it. They weren't messing with dogs at all. Not at all. So it's a very early on kind of thing. The other thing is, one of the last places where coyotes to expand their range was Newfoundland here in the east. And how they did that, this is amazing. They took a ride on some ice floes. So a couple of them hopped an ice floe, and it flowed over to Newfoundland.
Wow.
Well, how many coyotes are going to get there that fast? Not many. So there's these yellow labs running around on Newfoundland. Same thing happened. But it's fascinating, and we've seen this here in Maine. Somehow, then they expanded their range again, must have taken ice floes back, and we found a couple, 2, 3, or 4 of absolutely gorgeous coyotes of a golden color, the color of a yellow lab. Okay, so they have that. They've taken on that yellow lab color, and you know, all wolves that are black, that's a dog DNA. That's dog genetics. So when Europeans came over, you know, from Asia after the last glacier, they were bringing their dogs, and there were wolves here, and then they mixed with them, and that's what gave all wolves that the black. So when we see black wolves, that's dog, and so you're seeing some of that. But wherever coyotes are enough, they don't want to be with dogs at all. So that's something that was kind of part of the early expansion, that we don't see coy dogs anymore.
How big are their litters?
They're the average litter of a stable coyote family, and let's be specific there, is between 3 and 6. And it doesn't, a pups. And if they're lucky,
yeah,
a third of them will survive to be a year old. So out of 6, a year later, if 2 survive, they'll be lucky. All the others pass away from all different kinds. Living in the wild is very, very tough. And they don't always have pups every year, because the mother has to have enough food to be able to even get pregnant. And sometimes she will miscarry, or all her pups die inside of her. And because we humans don't see that. But we know that from science.
The litter sizes vary in whether it be like more in eastern or like down in Arizona and stuff like that because of climate difference.
No, that doesn't make any difference. Okay. No, same difference. Okay. However, what the difference is what we've seen, and this is another ancient thing that coyotes have done, and wolves do it too, but coyotes have perfected it, that when coyotes are persecuted, which they are, and killed, so there's a lot of killing of coyotes, what happens is you'll see females giving birth up to 13, 14, 15, 16 pups. Can't even imagine that.
Wow.
But that many pups. It's almost like a trigger that goes inside her. There's room enough for all of them because a lot of them have been killed. So they recompense for that by having more. And a lot of research has been done on that too. And so these ideas of individuals saying we're going to kill all these coyotes, there's too many, which there's actually, in Maine, there's not enough coyotes. We actually do not have enough of them. But people think there are. For a lot of people, one coyote is too many, you see, which is really sad. They don't know what they're missing. But anyhow, so that's the difference for them, is depending upon if they're stable or if they're being persecuted. And they will respond in that way of having huge litters for survival. Yeah.
Geri, you said that they traveled on ice across the ocean at some point?
To Newfoundland. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's amazing. How did they know to do that?
And they do the same thing. They swim here in Maine. They swim to the islands.
Really? So they go in the water and everything, and like dogs, and swim?
They're amazing swimmers. They're powerful swimmers. We have a place, I don't know if any of you have been to Acadia National Park, and part of Acadia National Park is called Isle Ho. And Isle Ho, half of that island is part of Acadia National Park. So it's a national park. And there had never been coyotes there. And what coyotes did was there's a number of islands. And what they did is they left the peninsula, and then they island hopped. They swam and swam and swam, hit one island, swam and swam and swam, hit another island, swam and swam, hit another island, and then hit Isle Ho. They're powerful swimmers.
That's pretty incredible.
And the ocean in Maine is not exactly balmy, to say the least, in northern Maine. And they people can't believe here in Maine, even I say that they're out they're at the island. Yes, well, it's not hard to, and they'll swim from. Maine has a lot of peninsulas that are kind of parallel from each other from the glaciers when the glaciers came up. So they'll leave one peninsula, swim across the water to the next peninsula. A human couldn't do it.
Wow, yeah, for sure. They sound like great swimmers, yeah.
They're great, just like cougars. Cougars are very great swimmers too.
Really?
Really powerful swimmers. Yes, they are. Yes, they're powerful.
You always think cats are afraid of water. Yeah, cats hate water, but that's not the case with cougars. You're saying.
I think when the wildness is, and it's part of their survival, and also it's getting to prey, is they do things different when they're wild. Yeah. It's very, very fascinating. Yes. Next question.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the wolf real quick. Do you think we'll ever see a resurgence of wolves in the Northeast and in this country? Where are they most prevalent?
Right now, where wolves are, where they're the most successful, are in Minnesota, in Wisconsin, and upper state Michigan. And the reason being is when there was the out and outright slaughter of wolves across the country, 2 million, but there's one place where they didn't get to them, and that was way northern Minnesota in the area that is called the Voyageurs National Park. And you don't want to go in there in the summertime unless you like mosquitoes, okay? Mm-hmm. So it is the mosquito laden. And believing that most probably that is why the wolves hid there in that area to save themselves from human exploitation. Same as the Florida Panthers went into the Everglades, and that was the only reason the Florida Panthers survived, is they went into the Everglades. And if you've ever been there in the summertime, out in nature, those mosquitoes are as big as, let me tell you, they'll eat you alive.
Like birds.
Yes, it's the same type of thing. And so what happened is when the Endangered Species Act came along and the wolves were protected right away, these wolves were able to become who they were again. And they made it and dispersed into Wisconsin. It is God's country in northern Wisconsin. It's very much like Maine. And then in upper state, Michigan, which again is like God's country, a lot like upstate Maine. And so that is this natural flow that happened because they were protected. In the West, they were starting to come back into Montana on their own early on. But then they were kind of made to come in with reintroduction into Yellowstone and Idaho and those places. But it's I was in school at the time during all that time, and it's really tough for them. They're off the endangered species list, and as soon as they are, The states are big time. Idaho killed 600 of their wolves within a year.
Wow.
It's like, let's get back to what we were doing before.
Yeah, right.
So it's a slow process of our humanity and of our culture to recognize and value and respect and share the land with these powerful carnivores. It's a slow process. And it's a process of to me, of responsibility as a scientist to bring to the people what really supports them and helps people, instead of preaching to them, to be a support in being in wonder and delight, but also having knowledge to coexist well, and having those capacities to be with and feel well and recognize their power and their capabilities, but not to fear them, but to respect them. Mm-hmm. And that's how our native peoples live with them. And so that's a whole process. Now, here, the wolves in the Algonquin Provincial Park and the wolves in Quebec, in Quebec, are 50 miles from the Maine border. So wolves do come in and out of Maine, that we know. There have been 2 of them shot in the last 10 years that are wolves. There have been wolves that have been killed, one in western Massachusetts and in upstate New York. You notice these are all relatively close to Algonquin wolves, okay? And these are the wolves that once lived here. But these wolves have no protection whatsoever. And of course, coyotes are being killed all the time. So the excuse is, it's a coyote, let's kill him. Okay? So when you don't have protection in place for species, the same human behavior continues. But if you don't have education too, it has to go together. People have to really have a deep understanding and awareness and skills and comfort. And it's a process, and it takes time with our species. It's an evolutionary thing. I think we're going through an evolutionary time of coming back to that, circling around from the high urban area of the Romo-Greco concept that we are separate. Yeah. And that was very alive in Europe. We're circling around now to a more aboriginal way, that if we want to survive on this planet, and we want our planet to survive, we need to be learning otherwise. So we're seeing that a great deal on many different levels. Carnivores are great teachers for that too. And so the wolves, and that's one of the reasons when I came back to Maine, it's like, we want wolves back here. Who is here?
The coyotes. Yeah.
So to teach our people how to live with this wild dog can be a great teacher to us, who lives very well with our farmers on our farms, if the farmer knows how to be with them and if they're stable. Then what happens is if wolves start coming back, it's like, oh, we know how to do that already. See, they've lived with them. And cougars are returning to Maine too. So we have cougars here in Maine too, very hidden. Of course, they don't announce. They don't do the song.
Right.
Coyotes come, they create a territory, we're here, and they start their jazz singing. And cougars don't. And so we know they're here, but they're very secretive, like all cats. And so my work is really to help incorporate this understanding that they're here and not be surprised because you know the response. So, and also with our urban people. I mean, bears are arriving in New Jersey big time.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And so the thing is, when we live in a human-dominated world where there are so many humans spreading out, where's our wildlife to go? And so it's a big, but they can adapt to us. It's just our learning to adapt to them, you see? And it's a whole new thing we're learning. A whole new thing. And that's why I really, really, really respect you, Chris and Rob, for having me come chat with you.
Yeah, of course.
And, that you can share this with others. And I can go on and on as long as you guys. Are there any other questions you have?
Well, do you have any other questions you want to ask specifically?
Cozies are human. No, not too many, really.
Well, I just wanted to say, I
know more about wolves and coyotes.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say too. Hopefully, with people such as yourself who are educating the masses on coyotes, that maybe people will become more comfortable with them, and maybe one day we'll actually see a resurgence of a wolf population in this area too. Because if people understand the coyote, maybe they can also understand the wolf.
Absolutely, Rob. And that is the idea, is what the ideal is that not to reintroduce wolves here to the east, but let them come from Quebec on their own paws. Okay? Let them come, walk in on their own, be accepted, be understood, respected. Wolves will be very different than coyotes. Wolves don't have this thing. We're learning in Europe that wolves are coming back in Europe, and they receive extreme protection in Europe.
Really?
The Europeans have learned their lesson, and there is great protection. And what they're finding is that wolves don't need wilderness. Wolves and coyotes, both of them, what they need is lack of persecution, to be protected from persecution. Leave them alone, and they will do their thing.
That's kind of like more human ignorance than anything.
Oh, it's definite human ignorance. I mean, I can't believe that there was such a large... I didn't realize it until recently, but there was such a large wolf genocide by the early settlers and Europeans. And even to this day, I mean, that's insanity to me.
Absolutely. A book that you may want to read, Rob, is called Predatory Bureaucracy. Take that down. Predatory Bureaucracy.
Predatory Bureaucracy?
Predatory Bureaucracy. It is one that I believe every American should read because we don't learn that in school. You want to learn what happened historically in this country. It is in that book, a highly researched book, and it's on the website and all the books that I have there. It's very important. People don't really realize what happened.
No, I didn't know it was to that degree.
Yeah, absolutely, and it continues. Over $150 million are spent every single year slaughtering massive numbers of our carnivores.
Yeah, we're destroying our own planet. We're destroying our own planet for no reason,
right.
really.
And so we're living in Europe that, yes, wolves can come back. It's just we have to prepare the people. And that's why, as Native peoples always say, Coyote is the teacher. So Coyote is the teacher. They're teaching people in urban areas. See, here I am.
Yeah.
I'm a wild cat. Mm-hmm. And so when people learn to live with Coyote in urban areas, in suburban areas, and then in rural areas and farm with them, when wolves bring their paws back, into the east, then Coyote would have done all the preliminary work for his big brother and sister. And that's really what I'm striving to do as a biologist, that Coyote becomes the teacher for the larger picture, and same with cougars. Cougars need to come back here. They need very much to be here. So Coyote is the teacher for these beautiful cougars. Are American lions. They are American lions.
Right.
They should be here, and they can live in suburban areas, and you wouldn't even know they're there.
They keep to themselves, right?
Yeah. Oh, much, and you never hear them. Very, very hidden. There's a typical cat. And when it comes to deer overpopulation in urban areas, the cougars are like this perfect predator that way. Perfect predator for that. And so Coyote plays this role in many, many ways because it is that psyche of the predator. And it's also the psyche of the predator-prey type of thing. It's that humans, I remember one of my earlier talks, this really thoughtful man, it was more and more in Maine, we were talking about predators. He says to me, and I love these kind of discussions, Jerry, he says, how do we humans get past this? How do we get past this revulsion of seeing a predator take on their prey? Stop and think about that. Oh, I can't stand that they're doing that. It's cruel. It's like, no, scientists, a really renowned scientist says that predators, there is no hate, there is no evil. There's none of this when a predator takes on the prey. It is strictly survival, period.
Right.
But humans see what they do is what we would do. They take our own emotions of hate and violence and we put it on them. And therefore we make them the devil because we act that. We can be very violent to each other and to other living things. And we put that on them and it's not in them. They just want to survive. Yeah. They're not doing it to be violent. They're not doing it to be violent. And that's a whole piece. You know, when you have discussions, that's why I really love, I have discussions with diverse people. And so people, a lot of different perspectives. And when you have those, a lot of diverse perspectives of people sitting around and talking and listening to you, and same with our Instagram that we use and my website, if people, you start talking about things like this, that's right down into the gut of our humanity. You know what I mean? And we're just not spilling out a bunch of little facts.
Yeah.
Right.
As humans, we want more than what our brain, just you can click into our brain. We want something deeper than that. And that's what I strive to do as a biologist.
Well, I think you're doing a great job.
For sure.
Yeah, you're doing a great job of it. We need more people like you that are trying to get this message out there.
Now, Geri, you did write a book, correct? I Am Coyote.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Are you thinking about writing anything else, or?
Yes, I am. I am starting to gather. I have actually 2 books that I want. One book I'm going to be writing. It's more of my experiences with people here in Maine, because I'm out with people all the time, not this past year though, but people telling me experiences they've had with coyotes that have mirrored to me what our native peoples had. Mm-hmm. It takes you totally away, blows your mind, this intelligence, this actual intelligent being wrapped in a coyote's body, relating to a human being in amazing ways. And people have shared these stories, different experiences they've had. And I don't do it in public a lot because it's almost like our culture is not even ready for it. Yeah. But somehow Coyote knows these people. They know individuals. And so the experiences, so I'm going to write this about all these different experiences, like small story things. Mm-hmm. Powerful, and some of them are, and one of them I actually put on our Facebook, and the response was over 6,000 people responded to a vet's experience with a coyote pup. It blew me away, and she wrote this really powerful piece. And so I want to incorporate all this into my book. Another one I want to do is I want to do one for children of I wonder.
Very cool.
But my book, I Am Coyote, is the first one, and I wrote it for the people. I wrote it from a coyote's point of view. And basically, what you and I have been talking about today is in this book. So the book is historically accurate and full of the ecology of coyotes, but it's told in a story form, the way our native people is used to. Mm-hmm. But it's all true. It's all real. And it's historically accurate. So it's the story of a young female coyote from the time that she's actually within her wild mother before she's even born to the time of her death. And her journey in life from Algonquin Provincial Park, and then how she disperses, finds her mate, which is quite an experience in its own way, how they find their territory, and how their lives evolve of motherhood, of fatherhood. They're very close to each other. They make their life. It's a very, very powerful relationship that coyote mates have with each other. And then it shows everything that goes, but not only them, but the whole ecosystem around them, the other species, human behavior around them, human activities on the landscape. What I have is that when she travels through the night, but then she sleeps during the day for protection. And what I do is I take her in her dreams and I go back historically to what happened before, to what brought her mother to Algonquin Provincial Park. So her mother was one of the females that came from the West. And so the response to this book has been overwhelming to me. I've had scientists respond to me, oh my gosh, Geri, I want to write for our people like this. I've had men say, I'm reading that last part over again, Geri. And it's really, really touching responses. If you go on Amazon, some of the things that people wrote.
Now, if somebody wanted to buy your book, you would go on Amazon. Is it? I don't know if it's at bookstores, Barnes and Nobles, or your website.
Right, you can go on. You can go onto Amazon and put in "I am Coyote," and the "am" is in capitals, so I have "I am Coyote." Or people can order it from any bookstore in anywhere on North America, in the United States or Canada,
Awesome.
and they can get it from there too. And I love the book, and I wrote it for the people because a lot of questions you asked, I answered them in the book, but in story form.
I'll have to check that out.
Yes.
One last question that I have. I believe there's a wolf conservatory in Massachusetts. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I do. I believe it's in eastern Massachusetts. Yes, there is one there. Yes, there is.
Yeah, I mean, you can actually like adopt a wolf or something like that.
Right. So what they do, these wolves are either wolves who have been, they can be wolf hybrids, or they can be pure wolves. A lot of these wolves are wolves that people thought that they'd like to have a pet as a pet. That doesn't work.
Was it like a
again, that's that concept that people think that you can take them on, of that lacking understanding and wildness. And so I believe that's what they have there. I've never been there myself, but I think that's what they have there. Yes.
Okay.
With that. Yeah, but I do know of it. Yes.
Okay.
And there's a number of different places in the country where, especially wolf hybrids and wolves, that people basically quote thrown away because they recognize it. I'm not going to sit on my lap,
Well, I even have friends who were like, yeah, man, I'd love to get like a wolf or a wolf dog or a wolf hybrid, and they probably really don't understand what it takes to actually have one.
And also, you actually don't want to support that trade, because you have to stop and think, where'd that wolf hybrid come from? So there's a wolf somewhere that's being made to mate.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
It's in captivity, and it's being made to mate.
Yeah.
With a dog maybe, and also oftentimes huskies for that. And then in time, very unnatural to a wolf, her pup is taken from her. And so there's a lot of hidden cruelty that people don't realize because they're so beautiful. And a lot of states, like Maine, does not allow anyone to own a wolf hybrid at all, and I'm glad. I'd like to see no one be allowed to them, because it is one of those things where, people are so beautiful, so people make big money. There's a lot of suffering. What happens is a greater percentage of those animals end up being euthanized.
Yeah, no good.
Because it's not fair to them. It's really not fair. It's not fair to the mother, the parent, or to God. It's that, again, that's an example, of Christian Roberts, of that humans just are, that not understanding of the wildness and the domestication piece of honoring wildness. And we don't have to own everything.
Right. Well, we want to. Humans want, I want to own a wolf. I want to own this. I want to own that. It's just like.
Right. Yeah, to me, if people want to have a wolf, you want me to tell you the closest thing to a wolf is, because I've had one myself, is a Siberian Husky.
Yeah, I was
one?
Yeah, a Malamute too, right? Malamutes, aren't they close to wolves?
Well, they're about the closest. Well, we realized that wolves were really with Siberian Huskies a great deal up there. However, the other piece is there is Siberian Huskies also are absolutely beautiful animals, but only certain people should ever have them. Reason being, you have to give them a great life. And Siberian Huskies don't sit around in your couch for 15 hours when you've gone to work and they'll come back. So they need to have people who love being out in the wild and adventuring and active. And sometimes the animals, because they're beautiful, they don't realize that they have needs. They have needs. And it isn't to sit around bored for 15 hours, while someone's off at work. And so that's the piece of understanding that. So I can speak for myself. I really like big northern dogs, because I love they have this piece of wildness in them. And yet I've given them a wild and wonderful life that they can have fun with, I've been committed to that. They're both in heaven now, but that's another piece. So if someone really wants one, get a husky, but only if you're ready for him.
Jerry, I forgot to ask you this before. Are there lone coyotes like how there's lone wolves?
Well, you think about us humans, okay? Think about us humans. You have humans who are married, okay? You have humans who are widowed. You have humans that stay bachelors or bachelorettes their whole life, okay? And you have ones that have these big families. The coyotes are the same way and wolves are the same way, okay? Depending upon their favorite way to be, the way they really are the most happy is that they have a mate and they have a family. That's how coyotes like to live. But sometimes they can't always find a mate, or the situations in life don't work. And so they keep looking and looking for a mate and end up maybe in the short life they have never had a mate. So that's the case, but it's not what their choice is. An example, same with cougars. You know that there was a cougar. The cougars are slowly coming back. They were pushed into the Rocky Mountains all the way across the country. They made their first step into the Black Hills of South Dakota. Now they're slowly dispersing. Of course, then they kept being killed in South Dakota. They have these hunting things as soon as they start getting better. So what happened is, and they radio collared them to kind of study them. So a cougar that was born in South Dakota, when they're 2 years old, their mom says, "You got to go, dear. You got to go. I'm having another baby." And so the young males have to leave home. They have no choice. But their social situation's a little bit different. It's almost like primates in that you have the male cougar has a huge territory, and the mother and the females, maybe about 3 or 4 female territories within that male's territory. And so that young cougar, when he disperses, he has to get out of the big male's territory and keep going. And he keeps going until he finds a mate. Well, this young cougar from South Dakota, he traveled out of South Dakota into Wisconsin, into Minnesota, crossed through the Great Lakes, into Canada, into Ontario, came into the upper state New York, into the Adirondacks. Ideal place for a home for a cougar, huh?
Yeah.
Didn't stop. He couldn't find his girl. He kept going, came south, came through south into New York, then came across, got into Connecticut, and was hit by a car.
Oh, man. I thought
I thought that story was going to be good, Gary.
I know. I thought you were going to tell me he came to Maine and found a mate.
Yeah. And so that's what's happening now is these young cougars, they are leaving, but the females tend to stay close to their mothers, and so they don't disperse. But here and there's a brave female that we're seeing once in a while is going a little further. And so these are the kinds of things that are happening with both. With wolves and coyotes, you don't know what's happening in their lives or what they're up against, in their lives. But the ideal for coyotes and wolves is to live in a family. They're very, very social animals. That's when they're the happiest. That's the life they want to live a lot.
So they're not lone. They're not lone by choice. It just happens.
No, they're not necessarily alone by choice. But just like humans, there's some humans that really are really, really happy about being solitary.
Yeah.
Yeah, humans that really like there's humans that really like being bachelor, kind of life they have, or bachelorette.
Yeah. Yep.
And I imagine there may be some personalities like that in wolves and coyotes. But what we've seen, there was also a wolf, that came out of Oregon, traveled over thousands of miles down into California, over the mountains, got real lonely at one point, and the coyotes accepted him in and played with him for a while because he was so doggone lonely. And then he turned around and went back into Oregon after traveling thousands of miles. He was looking for a mate and couldn't find one.
That's incredible.
And so, because he was a gray wolf, and he finally found a mate and then settled down. So finding a mate is really quite important in them. And sometimes maybe the lone ones have not found a mate. That's the same thing with humans, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Because they haven't found a mate, or the mate they would not, or the mate they would want. And so it's kind of, like I say, we're a lot like them, and they're a lot like us in that whole social structure. very much like that. Yeah, very, very much. Very interesting.
Very interesting. Absolutely. Yeah.
Me and Chris are lone wolves at the present time.
But if we do our part in our time during our time and our life in this amazing transition time, those that come up after us will be able to be delight and in awe of the howl of the wolf in the east again. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Sure, and Coyote will be here, saying, "See, I told you it'll be okay." You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's wonderful, but the thing is, we need to do our part, and doing our part is all these bits and pieces of communicating with each other on many different levels, and it's wonderful. I love what I do, and there's so many wonderful, wonderful people who, and that's why I have great hope of creating a more wonderful future, that others can delight in hearing the howl of the wolf again.
Yeah, I hope so.
Coyote will be yipping back and forth again.
Playing jazz. The Coyotes are like Miles Davis or something.
Yeah. And the other is, you'll notice on the little clip that I sent you about coyotes on the beaver ponds in upstate New York. If you notice that, it's a very interesting one. These are eastern coyotes, and you notice when they first start and they're singing, they sound like a wolf. They have a little bit of a wolf sound in them. And then they transition. And then they really get into the jazz singer part. And then they get into the operatic part. It's very fascinating how that great diversity. But note at the very beginning, that is definitely wolfy in their first part of their song at the Beaver Pond. Yeah, it is. So we're all one.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Why don't you give out your website and social media and contacts again for everyone out there?
Yes, the website of our Coyote Center is www.coyotelivesinmaine.org. And of course, it's for everybody here in the East, especially.
Okay.
All kinds of good stuff on it. And the Instagram is Coyote Center for Carnivore Ecology and Coexistence.
Okay. So
and one of my associates, Deanne, who you've communicated with, she is an amazing, amazing woman who does our Instagram for us. And she loves what she does, and she communicates out there in the world. And I love what she does because she's very warm and welcoming, and has brought many people to us, which I love that very, very much so. Very much.
Yeah, she's doing a great job. That's how I connected with you through the Instagram, because she found my post, and we communicated, and that's why we're doing this podcast right now. So thank you to her, and make sure everyone follow the Instagram page, Coyote Center.
Don't forget to check out the book, I Am Coyote.
I Am Coyote, in stores now, available on Amazon. Check out the website. Thank you very much, Geri. That was great.
Geri, I appreciate it.
I did too. I delighted in speaking with you, Chris and Rob. It was wonderful talking to you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
And anything we can do to help promote your cause, we will.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're gonna finish this. We're gonna finish this with the coyote howls.
Yeah, these are coyote howls, eastern coyote howls. So enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, honey. Street corners.
And thank you.
No, thank you.
Goodbye.
Street Corner Soapbox, we're out of here.
Peace. The Street Corner Soapbox. If you're a fan of the podcast, you can help support the show by donating to our PayPal at paypal.me/Street Corner Soapbox.
That's right, guys. Make sure to like and share all of our episodes. And for easier access to our show, check out our link tree at linktr.ee/Street Corner Soapbox.